2 years ago, Legion debuted their most powerful elite flagship gaming laptop, the Legion 9i. Some of its standout features included a unique forged carbon fiber lid, an integrated liquid cooling system for the GPU, an abundance of ports, a beautiful mini LED display, and the performance, it was absolutely bonkers. With an RTX 4090 running at 175 watts, it was a powerhouse. It was easily one of the fastest gaming laptops we've ever tested at the time. With the launch of the new RTX 50 series and Intel's Arrow Lake HX processors, Legion figured it's time for a refresh. But instead of just updating the specs, they went all in and completely overhauled the design top to bottom, and this is the result. Meet the new Legion 9i for 2025. This thing is an absolute tank. It's bigger, thicker, and yes, I'm not going to sugarcoat this thing isn't cheap. It's Legion's Halo product, aiming to deliver the ultimate gaming experience without cutting corners on performance or the material quality used to construct the chassis. Now, a few disclaimers. This is an early engineering sample, so I did receive this a few weeks ago. Legion gave us the opportunity to test it out and share our feedback, but at the same time, it allows you guys to give them critical feedback as well through this video. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And also, this video is not sponsored, so just want to get that out of the way. The first thing that hit me was just how massive this laptop is. For context, the previous generation Legion 9i came in a 16-inch chassis. The updated 2025 model, it's grown to a full 18 inches. It's also noticeably thicker. We're talking 27.95 millimeters or 1.1 inches thick versus 0.89 inches. And it's significantly heavier, like 7.7 pounds versus 5.5 pounds on the previous generation. So yeah, portability is definitely not a priority here. There's no way this thing is fitting in my backpack. If you're looking for a travel-friendly gaming laptop, this is certainly not it. Even, hold on, let me grab the power brick. The power brick deserves its own bag. It's a massive 400-watt adapter, which just goes to show that Legion is pretty serious about feeding this thing with enough power for maximum performance. And you know what? That's the trade-off that Legion was willing to make in order to focus on what really matters, which is best possible performance. Because you can spec this laptop with up to an RTX 5090 running at 175 watts of TGP, paired with an Intel Ultra 9 275X with 24 threads, up to 192 gigabytes of memory, and 4 SSD slots supporting both Gen 4 and Gen 5 drives. It's basically the twin turbo V12s of laptops, if that makes any sense. Now keep note that all other versions with less than 128 gigabytes of RAM feature 5600 mega transfers per second. All right, so now on to the fun stuff, performance. Now, I've got to say that we aren't able to benchmark every aspect of a laptop or any device for that matter that's so early in its development. At least not without some major strings attached. But in this case, the Legion team, they just told us, go for it. Run the whole testing suite, say anything you want, no strings attached. So that's exactly what I'm gonna do. So first things first, we decided to run the Legion 9i against the fastest gaming laptops we've tested up until this point, alongside the last version of the 9i, which was from late 2023. All were tested in their highest power mode. Also, the 2025 Blade 16 is thrown in here as well, since it's the last gaming laptop that we reviewed. But you also have to remember that it's a very, very different device when compared to the other options here. The first stop that I wanted to make is the way Legion handles the RTX 5090 on this thing. While it didn't hit its maximum of 175 watts in any of our testing, while the other laptops here flexed their RTX 4090s to that point, this one still managed to be the coolest and the quietest laptops of the bunch. Now that quiet is just a relative term there because every one of these laptops is almost unbearably loud when running in their highest performance mode. You'll be running a gaming headset, trust me. And a lot of that capability is due to the Legion 9i's completely revised quad fan cooling setup. If you remember, the 2023 model actually used an exotic integrated liquid cooling loop to bring temperatures under control. But yet, the 2025 model gets better numbers, all while using a more traditional vapor chamber. So kudos to Legion's thermal engineers on this one. But let's start with gaming. And at 1600p, honestly, with an RTX 5090 running at over 160 watts, would you have expected anything other than class-leading numbers? Well, probably not. But what you might not have expected is just how close some 2024 models and even the previous generation Legion 9i can get. I mean, Overall, the new laptop is faster, sometimes by a little and sometimes by a whole lot, especially in the 1% lows. And of course, the best results come in games that are very graphically intensive and are also heavily promoted by NVIDIA. And yet, it won't actually feel any faster to the naked eye than a year or even a 2-year-old high-end gaming laptop. And all of that gets placed on the shoulders of NVIDIA because based on our CPU benchmarks, this laptop has one of the fastest processors ever placed into a laptop. I also need to call out Legion for something over here. Having access to 120 gigabytes of memory might be nice for developers, but that means the speed gets cut down to 4,000 megatransfers per second, which does negatively impact some games. Though in most cases, it's limited to the 1% lows in titles that are CPU intensive and particularly bandwidth hungry. In 4K, when you hook it up to an external monitor, all of these laptops smash into a GPU bottleneck in most instances, and that leads to all of the RTX 4090 devices getting pretty identical results. The only exception to that is the SCAR 17X3D's 1% lows in some titles, since it's using AMD's Ryzen 9 7945HX 3D chip. And this is also a resolution where the Legion 9i's 5090 really comes into its own with a lot more convincing results over the other laptops. So instead of there being just 5 to 10% separating them, in most cases, the 9i can stay about 15% ahead, and it manages to pull even further away in a few other titles. And that's pretty impressive when you consider it's pulling a solid 15 watts less than all the 2024 laptops that we're showing here. And yet, you'll still see a few instances where the frame rates pretty much stagnate across the board. So it certainly isn't a clean sweep. What about GPU accelerated outputs? Well, what we're seeing here is a very minor advantage in Handbrake and an even smaller one in Blender. Supposedly, neither app has been fully optimized for the RTX 5000 series yet, which is really interesting when you consider how long the desktop cards have been on the market. But when you switch over to NLE for video exporting, and it's a day and night difference. The 5090's triple encoder engine layout is doing most of the heavy lifting here, and that causes a major reduction in output times. So while the 5000 series might not be all that much better than the 4000 series in gaming, the 5090's extra NVENC block can be a big deal if you're a creator. So that's the GPU. It's just one side of things because the 9i's other strength is its processor, which Legion has managed to push all the way up to 164 watts in all core workloads, which is a new record compared to the other laptops that we've tested. And despite that, CPU temperatures stick to just above 80 degrees, though there is one trade-off, and that's just noise. I mean, look, at just over 55 decibels in the highest performance mode, this thing isn't a quiet laptop by any stretch of the imagination, but it's actually quieter than the 2023 model, while pumping almost 40 watts more into the processor. And from a raw synthetic performance standpoint, the 275HX in this thing is a beast. It can easily beat the 7945HX 3D, and it's miles and miles ahead of even the best 4900HX we've ever tested. Meanwhile, the single-threaded results aren't as insane, but they're still some of the best that we've seen from a gaming laptop so far, at least since AMD's new X3D chips are coming, and those promise to push the boundaries yet again. But synthetic numbers, they don't necessarily translate into dominating in every multi-core test, since some, like Blender, will tend to favor the 7945HX 3D due to its 8 additional processing threads. And still, even with that deficiency, the 9i's 275HX keeps things really close. And when you look at other apps, the Arrow Lake HX architecture is clearly superior, and even with less raw horsepower, the 9i becomes the fastest laptop we've ever tested. By a long shot, in certain programs that rely heavily on multi-threading for rendering outputs or transcoding. The 9i's only issue, at least with the configuration that we have here, is its excessive slow memory speed of 4,000 megatransfers per second, which tends to bottleneck it in memory-intensive situations like Photoshop. And like I said in the gaming results, I really can't recommend the 120 gigabyte version of this laptop because of this. Instead, what I would recommend is sticking to a 64 gigabyte layout and memory speeds that will hit a more normal 5,600 MTs per second. Despite this thing packing a 99.1 hour battery, the 9i doesn't exactly break ground when it comes to battery life. So under a gaming load, it clocked in at an hour and 27 minutes, which is noticeably behind the 2023 model at an hour and 40 minutes. And it's significantly below the new Razer Blade 16, which led the pack with 2 hours and 22 minutes. But you have to remember that Razer is using a much efficient AMD processor in that chassis. If you switch to light use case scenarios like web browsing, the 9i managed a little over 5 hours, which is still putting it at the bottom of this comparison list. So while this thing still delivers top-tier performance, battery life clearly isn't its strong suit, especially if you're planning to game or take this thing to work on the go, which again, for its size, that's going to be a challenge. Shifting to the exterior design, Legion has retained the signature forged carbon finish on the front lid. It's a one-of-a-kind look that would be unique to you, but they've now shifted or redesigned the Legion logo closer to the center. I don't like this particular implementation because the previous generation was sort of subtle, but this one kind of just shows off or flexes that it is a Legion laptop. The extended rear section for cooling is still here, but there's some bad news for those who liked having ports at the back. With the updated 9i, most of the I/O is actually shifted to both the left and right hand sides, with only power and HDMI located at the rear. Now, according to Legion, this whole reshuffle helps improve airflow and allows for more efficient exhaust for the components inside. We also lose the backlit I/O labels, which was super handy, but that said, they haven't compromised on connectivity. So on the right-hand side, you get a couple of USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A ports, a full-size SD card reader, USB-C Gen 2 port, and an eShutter switch for the webcam. And if we switch over to the left-hand side, there is another USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A port, Gigabit Ethernet, 2 Thunderbolt 5 ports with DisplayPort 2.1 and Power Delivery 3.0 support, and you get an audio jack. Visually, the chassis is all black and stealthy, which I do like, but what really stood out to me was this hinge. This is easily one of the stiffest that I've ever tested on a laptop. Maybe because it's a pre-production unit, but there's absolutely zero wobble. I can jam on the keyboard, still experience none of that. I mean, this is awesome. They really reinforced the hinge for a laptop of this size. I hope the production samples also have the same thing. And the build quality is phenomenal. This chassis is crafted out of a combination of magnesium and aluminum materials. Everything feels solid. It's put together really well, and it absolutely holds its own against premium laptops like the Razer Blade 18, for example. I should also point out that you get some tasteful RGB tech around the front perimeter of the laptop, and it looks stunning. I mean, the diffusion is perfect. It's also really, really bright. I mean, this is the lowest setting, but if I were to increase it, yeah, it's almost blinding. So you're gonna have to set to the minimum setting in order to get a really nice, comfortable, aesthetic experience. Moving on to the interior space, this is where things get really interesting. So Legion clearly listened to feedback from the previous generation 9i. So if you remember, the keyboard was pushed towards the center because of its complex cooling setup, which made typing feel a bit awkward. But now that you have a larger chassis to work with, there is significantly more room to cool the RTX 5090 and the Intel 275X. So you now get the standard keyboard layout with a full-size numpad, and it's so much more comfortable to type on. And these keys, man, it's easily some of the best that I have used on a gaming laptop. They feel tactile, it's just solid and precise. It almost feels like Legion took the legendary ThinkPad keyboard DNA and just dropped it straight into this laptop. Whether if I'm gaming or replying to emails, typing on this thing is just an absolute joy. The RGB lighting is vibrant and bright. It just adds an extra flair without being over the top. The trackpad has also been upgraded. So this time they've increased the size compared to the previous generation, and it is made out of precision glass. This thing for some reason feels super responsive compared to some of the other Legion laptops that I've looked at. Even the integrated left and right buttons, they're just nicely tuned. They're soft, but with just the right amount of feedback. My only gripe is its placement. It feels slightly off-center, so every time when I go to left-click on an item, my finger naturally just drifts towards the middle click or the right click instead, and over time, that just gets pretty frustrating. Perhaps it is an adjustment phase, but it is something to be aware of. The power button now takes the shape of the iconic Legion logo, and the built-in LED indicators show which thermal profile you're in. The one downside, though, is that they did remove the built-in fingerprint scanner, which is a bit of a letdown, especially when you're paying so much for a laptop. I feel like that's a must-have. Lastly, the palm rest area did get noticeably warm just by doing basic tasks, nothing intensive. I wasn't even rendering a video or pushing the CPU or the GPU. So yeah, something to be aware of. This is what the webcam looks like on the 9i. The quality looks decent. I wouldn't say it's the best out there. It is a 1080p sensor, and it's not final since this is a pre-production sample. I will say that the microphone quality is certainly improved over the previous generation. I think Legion has tuned the background noise reduction, but they have done that without compressing my voice too aggressively. Let me know what you guys think. Okay, so by now you guys are probably aware that I'm pretty vocal about front-facing speakers on laptops. It just gives you a much better audio experience. And you know what? Legion finally listens. So this time we're getting 2 tweeters in the front, 2 woofers at the bottom, and it is a significant upgrade compared to the previous generation. So it feels vibrant with clear highs. The bass could, be a little bit more punchy, but I'll tell you what, it is a noticeable difference compared to the bottom-facing setups that we're used to seeing on most gaming laptops. Shifting gears to the display, and you now get an 18-inch 16:10 4K LCD panel with a refresh rate of 240 Hz. So it's a pretty solid upgrade over the previous generation's 165 Hz panel. Now the jump to 18 inches is truly a game changer. I mean, all that screen real estate gives you a wider field of view, making in-game worlds feel a lot more immersive, and I guess the other term is cinematic. The 4K resolution is perfect for this size, and when you pair that with 240 Hz, it delivers razor-sharp visuals and ultra-smooth gameplay, so everything feels fluid and responsive. The only drawback is that this panel is dimmer than the previous generation. So it's a trade-off that Legion had to make in order to, again, upsize resolution and boost the refresh rate. But it still manages to cover 100% of the DCI-P3 color gamut, so the colors, they still look pretty vivid, accurate. So it's great for content creation, media consumption, if you want to dive into a little bit of photo editing, or even game development. This thing's pretty sweet. Now, for those who want more flexibility, there's also an optional dual mode display that can switch between 4K at 240 Hz and 1080p at a blazing fast 440 Hz. Competitive gamers, I'm sure you guys are gonna love this, although I am curious to experience that myself, hopefully one day. There's also an additional option for a 3D display with eye tracking capabilities, which supposedly works with regular video and image formats, and it supports a selection of games. Now, I don't have that configuration on hand, so I can't say for sure whether if it's the future, if it looks cool, or if it's just a flashy gimmick. I also think that option would be hella expensive. Now, once you get under the hood, this is where things get really wild. So Legion has clearly taken everything that they've learned from the previous generation 9i and they just cranked it up to 11. So what you're looking at is an advanced cold front vapor chamber cooling system synced with a quad fan setup for even better airflow and heat dissipation. They've also used liquid metal on both the CPU and the GPU. And here's some good news. They've brought back access to the SOTA memory slots. So you get 4 of them, which means you can configure this beast with up to 192 gigabytes of memory. Storage-wise, there are 3 M.2 slots for expansion neatly tucked right underneath the panel over here. The primary Gen 5 SSD sits all the way at the right, and the speeds, absolutely insane. We clocked over 12 gigabytes per second on read and over 13 gigabytes per second on write, which is almost double, nearly double the performance of the previous Gen 9i. So that's the new Lenovo Legion 9i. It's bigger, it's thicker, it's heavier, and it's a lot more expensive. Like, I'm not kidding. This thing, especially with the current situation that's going around right now, I mean, I think you might be expecting to pay more than $4 grand for something like this, which is just absolutely crazy. Again, don't quote my words on pricing because that's expected to change, but if we look at the laptop as a whole, they've made a few improvements compared to the previous gen. The first thing is, of course, you are getting a much better keyboard placement. The trackpad is bigger, it's a lot more responsive. Front-facing speakers, which is definitely a plus compared to the previous gen. The only, again, negative things that I would describe about this laptop is the ports placement at the sides. I really preferred it at the back with the previous gen, so I'm gonna miss out a lot with this gen. And then the RGB lighting at the front, it's just really bright. This is the minimum setting, by the way, so if I were to maximize it, it just ends up blinding you at night. But there is one thing that bugs me, and I think it bugs you too. Sure, this thing is the latest from Legion. It's the fastest gaming laptop that we've tested so far, and yes, with that much power push to the CPU and GPU, it's likely going to stay on top throughout most of 2025. But here's the catch. Despite all of that, it doesn't pull far ahead of the 2023 Legion 9i in actual gaming performance. Why? Because while Intel made huge gains with their CPUs between 2023 and now, the RTX 5090 is kind of underwhelming. It shows flashes of brilliance in some areas like NLE performance, but overall, the performance bump isn't game-changing, especially at high wattage. In fact, the 5090 seems to perform more efficiently at lower power levels, like something we saw with the Blade 16. So what does that mean for the Legion 9i, and maybe even 2025 gaming laptops in general? Well, they're powerful and premium, but also stupidly expensive. Maybe they might not even launch in North America thanks to tariff issues, and if you already have a 1 to 3 year old high-end gaming laptop, this probably won't be the upgrade that blows you away. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.